and welcome to a special episode of Geek Warning. I'm Suvi, and this is going to be a little bit of a brief chat, I would say, more than anything else. A chat between me and Dan Stefiuk and Paul Kantor from SRAM. And we're going to talk about everything to do with the new SRAM Rival and Force group sets. The main focus here was to talk about how SRAM approaches trickling down tech from the top tier group set to the lower tiers as they've done with these two group sets. So we're going to talk about whether they first start to think about the price points or shaving weight or something completely different. We're also going to touch on the fact that the public knew for months that there is a new, at least Force group set coming. And we're going to finish off with a little look into the future, what's coming. So there's a lot to cover here. So if you're interested in all the tech details and the comparisons between the new updated group sets versus the old group sets, that's all going to be in written format at escapecollective.com. So there's a full review of the Rival AXS E1 road group set, and Dave has a look at the Force Explore 1x group set. So if you want all the tech nitty-gritty, that's the place. This is a little chat between me, Dan, and Paul. And I hope that you'll take something home from this that isn't mentioned in the written articles. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to chat with me today. Dan and Paul, do you want to give a little brief introduction of your role at SRAM and kind of tell the listeners what you do?
Sure thing. Yeah, so hello, my name's Dan Stefiuk. I'm a road product manager based here in Chicago at the SRAM headquarters. I'm in charge of kind of ultimately being the voice of customer for SRAM, ultimately trying to convey the needs of the average cyclist as well as World Tour pros and communicating that to our development teams so that ultimately delivering the product that they need and having an enjoyable experience on it in the process.
Thanks for having me. I'm Paul Kantor. I'm director of drop bar product at SRAM. So been here a while, all in for about 27 years. And my responsibilities ultimately we're still a business. So I have to report up to our leadership on how the business is doing and then help run the teams and set direction for what products we want to make and how we fill gaps in our product line and ultimately satisfy riders and excite riders around the world.
Nice. And I bet you are exciting quite a few new riders with the launch of the new Rival and Force, which we're going to talk about. Even though we're going to cover the tech details in the article form, I think it would be good if someone's starting off with this podcast, maybe we go over the key differences. So what are the key updates on the new Rival and Force that we're going to talk about? Dan, you're probably the best person to speak about them. A quick rundown.
Yeah, I mean, trying to keep it succinct and just highlighting the key features for Force and Rival. I think part of this certainly started with the development of our latest generation of Red and keeping in mind that eventually we want to expand a number of these features to Force and Rival. I think the biggest thing that stands out for the group set as a whole is really the key touch point for all cyclists is the overhauled ergonomics and braking performance. I think that's definitely been a standout of the group set and positive feedback for those like yourself that have had an opportunity to ride it at the media launch. But just really putting the comfortable ergonomics, really positioning the rider with full control, being able to, brake from the hoods and access the brake lever and shift paddle when they're in the drops. And that's whether you're on tarmac or off-road. So that's really, I think, giving that more control to even kind of to the riders that really stand to benefit the most from having those features. And when we approached this project, we wanted to highlight, deliver that braking performance. We really wanted to elevate the shifting performance as well. So you'll see on the road platform, I'm introducing, essentially red shifting performance on the front mech and chain rings and bring that all the way down to Rival, which is pretty significant. And as well as just, again, listening to the way that riders are riding their bike and delivering a wide range of gearing, whether that you're pinning a number on or you just want to go ride with your mates in the mountains, just you have the full selection of gearing to give you that experience. And that's just the road introduction. We also have 2 new tiers of Explore, which will cater to the way that gravel riding is evolving and really delivering a dedicated gravel group set that, really stands apart from our competition and really delivering a wide range that really caters to the needs of cyclists, but more importantly, focusing on the chain management of the Explorer rederailleur. So there's a ton to pack in there, but those are the key highlights, I think, for the road and Explorer offerings.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of it all. You mentioned Red there, and I would like to say this is the tech from Red trickling down. And that launch was a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know when you launched Red last year, did you already have these products lined up that, okay, in about a year's time, we're going to bring out the Force and Rival level product with the same technology, but a little bit more affordable price point?
So ultimately, I mean, yes, we're just over a year from launching Red, but also recognizing that, the Red development was 3 to 4 years of development before that. So yes, we have our product plan, and that's what, Paul and our team, we put together our vision of where we want to be, what's our product roadmap. And from there, if we need to be realistic of, development resources and timing, of having that in mind when we're developing a product like Red, and knowing which features and how we're going to, expand that to Force and Rival ultimately. Part of that is intentional of just ultimately the product wasn't ready a year ago, and we need to, we're working through that development cycle, but also just to have a cadenced approach to, delivering it at a time that it's ultimately also not disruptive to the market. Too much new is almost, can be overwhelming to kind of sell that through channels. So we want to be able to deliver it when it's ready ultimately, but also when it makes sense, and deliver the features of the group set as well, where it makes sense and how.
So when you started 3 to 4 years ago developing Red, but you start all of the groups at the same time, basically, the process of developing them?
Somewhat, our product plans go out 5-6 years on a rolling timeline. So every quarter we'll review with the team and update what those product plans look like, and we'll get feedback from the market and make some adjustments. I would think of Red, Force, and Rival more of a platform. So we go, okay, we want to bring out these 3 tiers of products, and then what are the promises that need to carry throughout that, and then where can we make adjustments to satisfy a certain price point, but not necessarily give up performance characteristics that are key tenets for this platform. Roughly 5 years ago, we would have said, okay, it shouldn't be surprising to the industry that there'll be new Red. So what does new Red look like? It'll be followed by Force and Rival in some sort of cadence. And I don't think that's a secret. Much of the industry is run that way. How we execute it should be what excites the market. So then we work through that cadence. And then, of course, Gravel really exploded at the same time. And we had some really great technologies to bring into that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the fact that obviously now Rival and Force are officially out at the time when this podcast goes out, but people have known it for months about it coming. It's a difficult situation from your perspective, I can imagine, but do you take that on account when you're planning, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, it's somewhat frustrating. We never intended to leak anything, if we're totally transparent, we've had some partners that arguably misplaced our trust, and this sort of crept out there in the world of a highly connected world, that information travels really quickly. And it's always surprising to me just how enthusiastic people are about their bikes. They share this information with a lot of excitement. But it's not good for business. It devalues inventory in the market. It disrupts the channel. And we spend many years building out a development timeline and a go-to-market strategy that we think is responsible to the industry. And when we have these leaks, it disrupts that and our partners. So it's disappointing. We're looking at technology solutions and different ways of communicating that will help keep this tighter in the future.
Who are the first people that get to see the new group set? Obviously, outside people as SRAM who are developing the group set.
Yeah, typically they're the OEMs, because they have the longest timeline if they need to make adjustments to their frame, say UDH fitment, for example. They need to know many years ahead of time so that they can work through those changes. So the OEMs first, and then it works on a fairly organized cadence through the channel, depending on their needed timelines.
And I think to build upon that, certainly, OE partners, our customer, need to show them new products, prepare any frame fit standards, they can start planning their product line, but also just who sees the product in development. We've got an entire global team of test riders that have been riding prototypes for, sometimes up to 2 to 3 years ahead of time. And there's some components of this development cycle of Force and Rival that have, hundreds of thousands of hours on components. And, as they're available, as they're coming through that development process, they're getting updates and we're swapping those parts out. So thankfully, there are test riders are, a valuable resource for SRAM, and they've seen the product, but thankfully they keep it under wraps as well.
Yeah, that brings me to the fact that you did obviously start the bigger change in the different tiers of group sets with red. And assumption there is that you test it with the pro riders because it's a very pro-orientated group set. But when you then go down the tiers, who are the people who are testing? And what do you change when you go down to Force and Rival level? Do you still have the pros test it and tell their opinions about Rival, or do you then change it?
A little, well, ultimately, yes. When we're developing Red, it was certainly in partnership with our World Tour teams. Before I was in the product management team, I worked with our pro teams and athletes. So I was a liaison between SRAM. And then when it started with, overhauling the ergonomics and really seeing how lever position and handlebar shapes were evolving, developing Red, you're looking at, gearing combinations and addressing different needs of the pro rider. We know, like, as we spoke about, the ergonomics, the braking performance, that stand to benefit, the end consumer, as well. But, within SRAM, it's we're all a collective of cyclists. Our engineers, our designers, our test team, even, the creative side of things, we're all cyclists. We know the needs of what we'd like to see on our bikes, but also the way that, when we sponsor events, for example, like Steamboat Gravel, we're a sponsor of the event because it's an awesome event and we want to be part of it. But we also show up and we have, our SRAM booth, and we engage with the end consumer. And just, sometimes it's a formal survey that we'll send out ahead of time, or just engaging and riding and getting some handlebar time with the end consumer. It really, that's some of it helps feed the direction we take our product. And when we expand that down to Force and Rival. But yeah, the way the product is tested is similar, but also the way we gather information can vary depending on what type of need we're trying to address.
Which tier is the easiest to develop?
Oh, geez.
That's just a horrible question. It's so unfair. It's not that it's a horrible question. It's just such a hard one to answer. So often you could argue that Red is actually a little easier. You have fewer constraints in terms of the materials you can choose or the money you can spend. When you get down to sort of Rival and Apex level product, that actually is probably the harder product. You've got to make some hard decisions. You want it to be just like Red, but 40% of the cost. And that's a really challenging environment. And then you still have to make money on it. So honestly, it's the mid-tier products are harder to, you've got more decisions. You have to cut things out and really watch every cent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my next question around that. When you start with Red and the world's your oyster and you just go for the lightest and nicest things. But then when you go down, what's the first thing that you start to think about? Is it the weight, or do you set a price point? Because I know that the new groups, they're cheaper than the previous generation, which is quite remarkable. So do you start with that you set a price point, and then you start to think, where can we cut material and weights, and everything comes after the price?
It's a little bit of both. It's top down and bottom up, if you will. So again, I would have referenced earlier Red, Force and Rival being somewhat of a platform development. So there's key tenets in there, the braking performance that Dan referenced at the beginning, shift performance. These are all critical to being a successful drivetrain. From there, we all at the same time have to assess what price point does a bike need to hit, and how do we achieve that price point. And then we'll review the bill of materials and the features and say what can come out and still allow us to hit our promise of great braking and great shift performance. And then you start to peel out things like the bonus button is not on Rival, contact point adjustment, and go through material selection to see how you can best achieve that. And I talked to Dan about this a lot through developments is, these developments require the team to make hundreds of decisions every week, really. And you're constantly evaluating how you're tracking to these promises, and hopefully come out with a good outcome at the end.
Paul's certainly, done a great job keeping me in check, setting the vision and the target of where we're trying to land as far as for the product in each tier. But, then I go back to the development team of, really pressuring them, guiding them to get the most out of the product, where we're trying to get features, finishes, materials, and it's literally making decisions between a brush polished surface versus various different, like we're down to the detail of each component. And really the global team from the rear derailleur to the crankset to the shifters really focus on each and every bit of build of material to really come away to reach those targets. And that's where my job is to pick and choose which areas that we target to try to reach those milestones.
Hello. Thanks for listening this far. Unfortunately, because you're hearing me again, that means that this episode will cut off for you here. That might be because you're on a different feed, or it might be that you're not an Escape Collective member, because this full episode is only available for our members. If you want to listen to the rest of the episode, where we, for example, talk about why SRAM didn't go 13 speed, then you can simply join Escape by heading over to our website, escapecollective.com. That gives you access to the rest of this episode, a load of other podcast episodes, and some extra content for members, and loads of articles that only members get access to. So it's well worth it. So thanks so much for listening to this far, and I hope that you'll want to hear the rest of this episode as well.